Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill Obrien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill Obrien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is, I believe it's Tuesday. Yes, it is. It is the fifth day. The whole calendar in my mind built around that day. But today is the fifth day of February in the year 2019. It is a pleasure to be with you here at the Virtual Center. We are live. We were unable to do a program yesterday, as I'm sure those of you who listen regularly know. But we are here today, and we got, I'm one of the talk show hosts or co-hosts on cable talk shows that I really have gotten to like a lot is Stephanie Ruhle, who has a program at 9 a.m. in the morning on MSNBC. She has a career in finance. She has a very strong economic background. She was involved with Wall Street. And I find that I pick up more good information from that particular show because of her expertise. She doesn't flaunt it. But, because of the things that are going on with the issue of corporate tax rates and all the rest of it, she finds herself in conversations with guests where they're getting into this stuff pretty deeply, and the strength of her background she'll introduce herself and say, this is Stephanie Ruhle with a lot to cover today. Well, this is Bill Obrien at the Virtual Center, and my God, do we have a lot to cover today. There is so much that has happened since we've been together live, which was last Wednesday, in fact, I had to make myself a few notes, just jot down a few notes, because there's so many things. Things are happening so quickly that when if you have a hiatus of 5 or 6 days like we have, things tend to fall through the cracks. So I had to make notes to myself, and I want to touch on a few of those things today. I've got to make a comment or two. You will please forgive me, because I know you've had it. You've had as much of it as you could possibly stand. But I cannot let this program go by without making at least one comment about the Super Bowl. I don't know that there's a comment left to make. And I'm not, I don't think I'm hiding anything when I tell you how absolutely unbelievable I thought the game was. I'm a lifelong Patriots fan. Used to go to the games when they were 1-50, when they had their 1-15 seasons, when they were the Boston Patriots, and then when they became the New England Patriots, until Brady came. They were kind of the doormats of the league, I believe, and I was a fan then. And at that time, because they were so bad, you could actually afford to go to the games. They weren't sold out because a lot of people just wouldn't go see them. So I used to go see them. I went to preseason games and everything else then. Well, of course, once the Patriots became good and ticket prices began to go up, I can't afford to go to a game now. Even if I could get a ticket, there's no way in the world that I could afford to go. But I feel very strongly. I feel in many ways, as a fan, I feel humbled, blessed to believe that I've been able to witness this going into the 19th year of this dynasty in a professional sport, which has done everything it can do to prevent the existence of dynasties, with salary caps and all the rest of it, to try to keep balance amongst all the teams. And yet, in spite of that, this has been one of the most incredible runs that anybody could possibly imagine. And I have to keep pinching myself because I don't deserve it. But I've got to be honest with you. I've absolutely, I just admire. I think what I admire is the perfection, is the demand for affection and the willing to work hard enough to get it, and do the things that are necessary to get it and keep it. It just amazes me. But I have a few things I wanted to say about the game, which I think were not so much the game, but the outcome of the game that I wanted to make. But first of all, I do want to, since we haven't been together for a while, I do want to make sure that I extend the invitation to those of you who might be looking forward to coming on the air and sharing some thoughts with us on some of the issues of the day, and there are so many. We'll try to get to a number of them as best we can. Let me again acquaint you with the ways that you can communicate directly with us. The most immediate and direct way, of course, is to call into the Head On Radio Network studios and let Agnes put you directly on the air. We have two phone numbers that will accomplish that. Either number will work. Both of them have the same area code, 304. The first number is 304-574-8178. 304-574-8178. The second number is, again, area 9. If you're really not comfortable calling in, or can't, or you're working and you don't, maybe, don't have the opportunity to call in, believe me, I understand that. But at the same time, you have a comment that you really wanted to make about the program, about some of the issues that we deal with on this program, then by all means, please know that I would love to hear from you. We've got two ways that you can communicate directly with me and get your thoughts to me. And depending on what you've got to say, I hope that you will trust me to put your ideas on the air so that our other listeners can get the benefit of the comment that you made. I mean, you can obviously call in and make that comment yourself, but I hope that, I'm guessing that most of the time what you've got to say, what listeners have to say, is really something that our other listeners ought to hear. And so I like to take the prerogative, I guess I could call it, of doing the very best I can to share your thoughts with our other listeners if they do seem to be pertinent and something that other people ought to know. If you'd like to send me an email and share your thoughts with me that way, let me give you my email address. It's Obrien, Obrien, 906 at gmail. Directly with me is via our Facebook page. Many of us are on Facebook, and so therefore, for many of us, this might be more convenient and faster than taking the time to put together an email. If you go to our Facebook page, just go to the homepage, facebook.com, and in the search box at the top, type in the Virtual Center for Study of the Constitution, and you'll be onto our Facebook page, and you'll see a number of postings there. I put a few on there over the past weekend. And I think the most recent posting has been related to the education bill that's working its way through the West Virginia legislature during this session, which doesn't end until early in March. Anyway, if you go to one of the postings on our Facebook page, you'll see a comment button after each posting. And if you click on that comment button, it gives you the opportunity to make a direct comment to me because it comes to my Facebook page. At least I get notice that somebody has commented on our virtual center page. Obviously, the assumption is that the comment you make would be related to the posting that it is associated with. But that doesn't necessarily have to be. I get the comments, so if you've got something you want to say about the program, whether it's related to the particular posting or not, I hope that you'll know that by all means, take the opportunity to express yourself. The whole point is, it's important that we communicate. It's important that all of us find ways to communicate more and more and more. This evening is the State of the Union message, the delayed or postponed State of the Union message. And Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate who lost the race for governor in the midterms, has been selected by the Democrats to give the response to the State of the Union message. I've read, as I'm sure many of you have, the expectations as to what the president's going to say. But I'm also aware, as you are, that not too many people who take this stuff seriously really believe that it much matters what he says, because chances are he's not going to follow through in what he says he's going to do anyway. If you think back to last year's State of the Union message, the president promised a lot of things that he was going to do. His theme was unity. His behavior since then has been division, has been to further widen the gaps and create a sense of hostility to the point that each side increasingly believes that the only way it can win is at the expense of others, the other side. And so all his promises about putting all these dollars into infrastructure improvement and all the other things that he promised, tax cut for the middle classes, and we saw the tax cut that we got, and on and on and on, you begin to realize, and most of the pundits are saying basically, that it really doesn't too much matter what he says, because he's going to be reading off a teleprompter. And what most people who really are tuned into these events are anticipating is a situation where the president is going to veer off away from the teleprompter. And we've seen enough. The assumption is that we've seen enough on the part of this president to know that he's not going to go too long before he starts to make off-the-cuff comments about something. And so that's really where the interest on tonight's State of the Union message is focused. Not so much on what he's programmed, what he's supposed to say, but the comments he's inclined to make that aren't in the script. And the fact of the matter is there's more focus this time on the Democratic response to the State of the Union message than there is to the message, to the address itself. I also think it's going to be a couple of things are going to be very interesting. And that is the behavior of those in the audience. The traditional pattern over the last several State of the Union messages has been that when the president makes certain proposals, his party stands up to applaud, the other party stays seated with their hands folded. And so what we see is this wave, if you will, of one side of the House gets up in applause, the other side stays silent. And then the other side will applaud, and the president's own party members stay silent. That's been the general pattern. But since then, the inability of the parties to work together and agree on much of anything, the debates over some of the things that are going on, like the wall, which we'll talk about in a few moments, it seems to me create a new dynamic that's going to be on display during the address this evening. And the other factor that is new is over the president's shoulder is going to be Nancy Pelosi. And it's going to be very interesting to watch her reaction to some of the things the president says, whatever they might be. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think that many people actually believe that what he says in his address this evening is really going to be a game plan for what happens over the next several months to the next year. I think everybody, including myself, would be surprised if it turns out that way, because that doesn't seem to be true to form at all. So I think that's one of the things that I think is extremely important. The other thing that is other things that are extremely important over the last couple of days related to national politics, which I wanted to comment on because it would be a serious oversight to not mention these. One of them is the hostile relationship that seems to have developed between the president and his intelligence agencies. You'll remember that early last week, the leaders of the different intelligence agencies appeared before and made presentations before a Senate committee on intelligence. And you may remember as well that the president immediately took issue with what these people were saying, and in a tweet, of course that's where most of this happens, basically disparaged the testimony of many of his own intelligence appointees, Gina Haspel, Dan Coates, the latest director of the Christopher Wray with the head of the CIA, all of these, and FBI rather. I think Gina Haspel is CIA, and said basically that they were wrong in many of the things they said about policies towards particular foreign situations, and that they ought to go back to school. And the reports are that one of the members of the agency responded to that and said the president ought to go to school. And based on this, or as a follow-up to this, a report has come out, and I think it's in this week's New York Times, on what the intelligence agencies are saying about briefing the president on the political situations, the most dangerous situations throughout the world, whether it be North Korea, whether it be Iran, whether it be Syria, whether it be Afghanistan. And basically, the text of this report, which comes from people who have actually been involved in providing intelligence to the president. The phrase that has come out of this is what is referred to as the president's willing ignorance. Willful ignorance, I think, is the exact phrase. That many of these intelligence people are convinced that the president chooses to not accept information, intelligence that contradicts what he wants to hear or what he believes he should be hearing. And he basically operates on the assumption that he can just shut down and not take seriously information that he doesn't want to hear. The other thing, so therefore, the president is operating on the international, in the international theater of the world with no meaningful intelligence. Because when he does reject a particular recommendation or particular evidence from one of the intelligence agencies, he doesn't have anything on which to support or back up his opposition other than what he believes or wants to believe. Or more important, wants his political base to believe. Obviously, he's operating from an assumption of political priorities. He is basically more interested in making sure that he keeps the support of his political base than he is in the information being given to him by the intelligence experts. Therefore, he chooses to remain willfully ignorant. Not only that, but members of the intelligence community have adopted behaviors in bringing intelligence information to the president that speak to the realities of what they're dealing with. And these are specifics from this report. That members of the intelligence community are extremely reluctant and careful about bringing information to the president that contradicts what the president wants to hear. Amongst themselves, they have reached agreement that they will not bring intelligence to these briefings that they know is going to fire up the president's anger. So therefore, he doesn't get it. Of course, if they deliver it, he wouldn't get it anyway because he'd reject it. So therefore, he's going into international negotiations, international situations with little substantive background on the issues involved and the political realities involved in whatever the particular situation might be. Not only that, but they have also adopted the practice of reducing the intelligence information that they bring to the White House to 2 or 3 sentences, no more than 2 or 3 sentences, because the president won't deal with or read more than that. You got to keep it simple. If it becomes too complex, too complicated, then he basically shuts down. And another thing, and this third thing is what I found to be the most telling, that during intelligence briefings, these people have pretty well concluded that they have got to mention regularly his name and his office. Mr. President. Obviously, what they are doing is inserting personal information related to the president in order to hold his interest or keep him awake or keep him tuned in to what they're saying or what they're presenting. And this report, of course, compares this particular behavior with previous presidents. They talk about Obama not only because he's the most recent president, but also, like President Trump, Barack Obama came to the office with little international experience. Beyond serving in the Illinois legislature and one term, not even completed, in the United States Senate, President Obama really didn't have a very strong background in international affairs. The difference is, of course, that meant that he was determined to learn it. And the intelligence folks say that when he came to the intelligence briefings every morning, he was prepared. He did his homework at night. He brought home reams of materials that he read over in preparation for these meetings. And of course, the report contrasts that with a 2-year experience with Donald Trump. Needless to say, it's disturbing. It's extremely disturbing. That's one of the bombshell issues that we have been dealing with since the last time we were together here at the Virtual Center. This weekend, I believe Sunday, but I'm not sure, a scathing report came out from Vokes about the president's daily work schedule and something called executive time, which is the most common feature of that work schedule. Somebody on the inside, in the White House, released the president's daily schedules since last November's midterms. And based on what's in there, it raises serious questions about whether, in fact, the president's doing any work at all. There were some days, I saw examples of some of these days, where the president might have a 30 or a 45-minute meeting scheduled from 10:30 to 11:45 on a particular morning. And the entire rest of the day is devoted to what is called executive time. And the phrase executive time stems from the previous 2 years when John Kelly was working shoulder to shoulder with the president. And apparently the president convinced John Kelly that he didn't like his day from beginning to end, from morning to night, to be previously scripted. He wanted free time to maneuver, to conduct business, to make phone calls to foreign leaders. And he felt like he needed this kind of flexibility built into his schedule. So John Kelly agreed and came up with the phrase executive time as a way to indicate that on the president's daily schedule. The fact of the matter is, when you look at it, most days feature little but executive time. The conclusion that some of the pundits have reached, who have read all of these daily schedules, is that most days, more than 60% of the president's time is unscheduled, which means he's not scheduled to do anything other than what he chooses to do. some of the reports that came out in support of this suggest that the president spends an inordinate amount of time on the phone, calling friends, calling leaders in the Senate, calling friends around the country, corporate leaders and the rest. So it's hard to criticize that because one would expect the president to do that.
Bill,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but I'm going to add Horst in.
Oh, great.
So hold on one second.
Okay.
I'm working. Go ahead, and I'll get this done.
Okay. All right. Well, that's exciting because I think Agnes is working on getting Horst connected with us, so that'd be great. We haven't heard from him for quite a while. So anyway, this issue of executive time, it seems to me, is very critical, especially when you go back to the campaign and you remember the things the president said about previous presidents who he criticized for spending too much time on the golf course.
And Horst is with us, Bill.
Is he really? Well, Horst.
Yeah, hang on. I got some audio issues here. Just give me a second. I'll get right with you.
Okay, buddy.
We all make a good team, don't we?
I'll tell you.
And
hey, listen, there's better communication that goes on in Washington. Let me tell you that.
I know. It's magic.
Yeah.
Horst helps me figure out the magic, too.
Oh, he's pretty sharp.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's pretty sharp.
I think I got it.
Hey.
Let's go. Hey.
We can hear you all right. Well, you sound great.
No, yeah. Well, the thing is, I was listening to you on the live stream over the over an internet connection, and then it just came through on Skype. And Agnes and I have been trying to work out for the last 10-15 minutes how to connect on Skype because for some reason my messages weren't coming. It's a long story, not worth it. But anyway,
all right.
It is very good to talk to you again.
It's wonderful. I've been following you your messages occasionally on Facebook, and first of all, I understand I need to congratulate you because you landed a job that you claimed that you said that you kind of always wanted to have.
Well, that was not a particular job I was looking for, but the profile fits my needs very well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's close to home. It's a school that my son can go to potentially next year. We'll see about that. The program seems pretty good, and yeah, I don't know.
Well, that sounds
on paper, it looks like a step up, and I've heard some iffy feedback from other teachers, but
well, you always get that.
You know the academic world,
yeah.
Some people have a knack for making relations with the administrators, and some people don't.
Some people don't. That's right.
Yeah.
And there's a hostility between those two groups.
Sure, for sure, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So what's been going on other than jobs?
Well, it's been all jobs for me for most of the last year.
Has it really?
Between that and last year was pretty disruptive for me in a lot of ways. So I've been kind of scrambling, trying to make up for lost ground for about the last 8 or 9 months.
Wow.
So, and in the middle of all that, of course, the entire world is just in a spiral.
It's going to pieces. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, we've been kind of following that one, and well, I'll tell you, it's frightening. I mean, I was just talking about this executive time stuff on his daily schedule. I mean, it is absolutely it's beyond despicable. I mean, this is incredible.
No, yeah,
and there's so
finding
many
ourselves in a position where we say this is the most outrageous thing ever, and then
and then
the next day happens.
The next day happens, exactly. And the fact that there is such a significant number of people, or percentage of the population, that rejects or refuses to look at or consider any of this, and just continues to blindly follow. And apparently, the more criticism of the president's behavior in office that we see, the stronger the support for him amongst this group becomes. Although it is appearing that the size of that group is beginning to decline. But
well, they're starting to feel some personal pain now. Apparently, I guess like as taxes are finally getting processed and people are finding out they came out very badly in this last year. I think that's going to be a major factor. But
oh yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, like these social issues, the things. I mean, it's just one of the more shameful marks on our national character is there is such a large percentage of us that are so invested in making other people feel bad. And that really seems to be what it comes down to. It's like the Trump's core supporters really are just – they live for making people that make them feel inferior in some way, like just hurting them. I mean, like they call it owning the libs, as it were. And that's – and I don't know what you do with that.
I don't either. I don't either. I mean, obviously, there's this all of this stuff for so long has been repressed that I think most of us tended to believe that it no longer existed. And now
it wasn't that big a factor. Yeah.
Now we're beginning to see that we've got major work ahead of us as a society to reverse some of this stuff. That not to bury it, but to deal with it and
learn from it.
Put it to rest once and for all. Exactly. And how we do that, I don't know. I've been very disturbed about this situation in Virginia. Not only because I feel close to the state of Virginia, but I've been very, very encouraged by the direction that Virginia politics is going. And now to have this happen, I mean, it's pretty obvious it was a extremely right-wing publication that produced this photo and all of this. But the fact is the governor didn't handle the whole situation well at all.
No, he almost doesn't even come across like an actual breathing human being.
No.
when he's trying to have these press conferences, it's just awful. But I think that's my personal take is that that's his own kind of charisma or something like that. And the guy just appears to be genuinely clueless in a certain number of ways.
And that's what And I think it was Terry McAuliffe that made the point that at this point it's gone so far beyond the issue at hand that it doesn't matter any longer whether he's in the picture or is not. That's not the issue any longer.
It's a fire. You got to put it out. I mean, it doesn't matter how you do it. It's out of control. And I was reading another piece of commentary just earlier today. In fact, it's like if he had handled it in a completely different way, he could have gotten. There was a path out, but he's doing this weird stuff instead, and
he didn't make it. He changed the story a couple of times, and it's terrible. And then the stuff about the lieutenant governor in Virginia, and you begin to see political ramifications to all of this. I mean, it's not a coincidence. Well, he said that. He said obviously this isn't a coincidence at all. But the fact of the matter is,
this is a coordinated. I mean, now and there may be something to the original stuff. The photograph is what it is.
Right.
We don't exactly, as far as I know, we still don't exactly know which one of the people that Northam is supposed to have been in that picture. But there's something there for sure. But is it as much as they're making out to be? And what happens if you eliminate the governor and the lieutenant governor? Then guess what? The Republicans get control of the state again. It's also neat, it's just too pretty.
I watched an African American woman last evening on CNN on Cuomo's program late last night that has known Northam since I think 1972. They grew up, they lived in the same neighborhood. She's known him for years.
Right.
And she claims that there's not a racist bone in his body, that all of this is wrong. Well, the fact of the matter is he's totally mishandled this. So he's demonstrated a degree of political ineptitude that you're right. It's a fire and it needs to be put out. And how you do it doesn't matter anymore, but you got to put it out, and you got to move on beyond it.
Yeah. Hopefully you can put it out in such a way that you don't hand the state over to the Republicans, because right now they are guaranteed to be a cure that's worse than the disease.
Exactly.
If they can control.
Virginia was trending in the opposite direction. It was ceasing.
Had been for a while.
It was ceasing to be a red state. Exactly. When I lived there, it was a red state.
Yeah.
And now it's trending in the opposite direction. I was feeling very encouraged about it, and the fact that he was getting support from Republicans as well as Democrats, and he was doing what all of them say was a good job, makes this even more of a tragedy. Anyway, but
I think this is an example of a person who just has uniquely bad, people skills when it comes to something like this.
Right. Exactly.
Which is kind of, it's hard to imagine how you can be like that tone deaf and rise to a position like the governorship of a major state. But I guess these things can be done. Not really sure.
One thing I'm interested in, I mean, there's these little things, but there's so many little things that they become big things, I guess. But tonight's State of the Union message, there's a young boy that Mrs. Trump invited to the State of the Union message tonight, who is a victim of bullying. He's, I believe, a 5th or a 6th grader, and he's weighted down because his last name is Trump. Yeah. And his friends in school berate him for the fact that his name is Trump. So the debate last night, I mean, I was watching conversation last night about whether, in fact, by inviting him to the State of the Union message tonight, she's going to subject that child to more after tonight than he's been subjected to before. But on the other hand, many people believe it's a good, she's been very consistent in trying to do something about bullying on the internet and those kinds of things. But I don't know, so that's going to be a little something to watch tonight. There's so many little things to watch. No, the message that the president gives us is probably the least significant part of the whole evening, because he knows it anyway. So
I've read this story, or I've seen bits of it, and my instinct with these people is, to me, this is opportunism at some point or other. And yes, they are probably exploiting that kid, and I don't know if it's really that kind of a situation where it would actually expose him to more ridicule than he's already undergoing. Then
right.
Where are his parents? I mean, like, do they not have a sense of this? I mean, like, there are so many outside factors. I would like to see like the broader universe of this situation, but I'm not getting it because we're only getting like a few key points, and they are feeding. And again, it's kind of like that whole thing about like what drives Trump's base is the sense of aggrievement, like they're personally put upon by people who is presumably consider themselves their cultural betters or something like that, and this just seems to feed right straight into the same old thing.
I know.
Here's our and we found a poster boy, and he's going to come up here, and Melania, she's all against internet bullying, except you could take
when
this
he
back
does
to what do you care? When has the Republican Party ever cared about bullying unless it happened to one of their own? Sure. White Christians or something like that. The rest of the time they don't really care. Or if it's one of their opponents like Northam, with a case in point, they don't care about racism when it's not one of their own members. And this also kind of highlights how the Democratic Party obviously is quite different in that respect. So. Right.
Well, one of the, and I'm going to be doing in the next day or two a piece of the program on this issue, but it's becoming very clear that the that the Democratic, I mean, the media is inclined to tell us that there's a struggle within the Democratic Party with the progressive wing and the moderate wing, and the implication is that there's a significant moderate element within the party that sees the progressives as being too extreme, too radical. But the point is that this labeling and most of these allegations are coming from the right, from Republicans, who are in other words, if you think back, liberals have been defined for a long time by conservatives. Conservatives have taken it upon themselves to tell everybody in the country what liberals are and why liberals are dangerous, and liberals have let them do it. And for a long time, liberals ran away from the word liberal. It was so much of a negative that they refused to even own up to being one. And it seems to me that the Democratic Party is undergoing a change, and that it's beginning to return to its roots, I believe. And I think that's good. I think that it's beginning to speak for programs and policies that really apply and fit the bulk of the American people, not just a few special interest groups and corporations and things like that. I really think that that's positive.
No, Dr. Bill, I'm right with you on that. I would add to like what you've laid out already is I think the right has not only been so successful in defining liberalism to the world, but also to liberals. I mean, like if you notice now, it's like we have like all these splits. If you're in having certain conversations with left-minded people, liberal is a bad term.
Yes.
And you want to be progressive, or you want to be I'm not even exactly sure. I mean, like liberal, it can be a dirty word even on the left, and I think there's a fair amount of people that conflate liberalism with neoliberalism. I think there's a fair constituency of people out there that are more or less, decently minded, but that don't know the difference.
Right.
Because these attacks started with Reagan. Reagan was the one that made liberal a dirty word. Him and
yes.
the Atwater and that crew. And it's I remember reading the Doonesbury comics back then. Bloom County.
Yeah.
Where they were going out liberal hunting. And he was doing it from a left perspective, like making fun of what Reagan was getting away with. But they were so effective. They just decimated the entire movement.
And they basically resort or employ tactics that liberals just don't do. I mean, just grew up believing we're wrong, and you don't go that far, and you don't cross that line, and basically they stopped responding, and I think they began to hide.
No. Starting with Reagan, there's a progression. You can actually see the steps. Reagan, got away with a certain amount of stuff, and by the way, avoided impeachment for what was very, very arguably like almost treasonous level of conduct.
Right.
Skated on charges that would have brought a Democrat down in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get to Gingrich, and then they find out we can push the boundaries a little bit more and see what we can get away with, and they got away with a whole lot more.
Right.
Right. You go up to Trent Lott. You go up to you go up to the George. When you consider what the Republicans got away with in terms of just like complete partisan outrage during the George W. Bush years, when they controlled both houses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would turn the lights off, when other members were speaking. They would hold secret meetings in the basement somewhere, and they wouldn't let the Democrats in.
Right.
I mean, all that kind of stuff. We think that Trump is like something new. Well, he's new, but the GOP's been acting like this, and it's becoming increasingly clear that they're as soon as they realize what they can really get away with, because no one's going to stop them, they just keep pushing it. They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we are, I hope, I hope this bubble's gotten so big it's going to pop at some point.
Right.
But it keeps expanding, and we're just all kind of waiting. It's like, how big is this thing going to get?
Well, I'm beginning to see some pushback, and I find it encouraging. And I think, I mean, I've pretty well concluded, and I don't know whether I should say I've concluded yet, because that implies that I've reached a decision that's final, and I haven't. But I really believe that the campaign over the next, to the 2019 elections, 2020 elections, is going to be an important debate, an important national debate on policy. And I think the Democrats are going to drive that debate, and I think that's exciting. But I think what Trump has done is create the kinds of problems for Republicans that are going to take them out of the national debate. I really believe this is going to be a democratically dominated campaign. I think the issues, the policy issues that are on the table, and what the American people are going to begin to be talking about, are things that Democrats haven't talked about for 3/4 of a century, since the New Deal and immediately after that. Because when we came out of World War II, the New Deal had been, the rhetoric of the New Deal had become so successful that society especially in the 60s and 70s had pretty much bought into a perspective that really emerged in the New Deal. And once that happened, people stopped talking about it and stopped defending it and stopped trying to understand it, and basically left it vulnerable for Reagan and Gingrich and all of those people to attack and to seize the initiative. And I think we're finally beginning to get it back, and I think that's encouraging. But again, I've never been accused of being of being not optimistic enough. I tend to be more optimistic than I maybe have a right to be.
You need it. I mean, that's what we want from our educators. I share that weakness with you too, I think, but probably maybe not to the degree you have it, but still, yeah. No,
I've always been an optimist, and I really do have a real genuine faith in this system. I think that this system is strong enough that it's going to be able to deal with this, in spite of the fact that it's going to take we've taken a tremendous hit. It's the political system is taking a tremendous hit. I mean, and I never believed that there were as many people in the country who'd listen to this stuff and could look the other way or ignore it or put their own self-interest first or whatever the hell they're doing, to ignore the realities of what this guy's getting away with. I mean, it's gone beyond the point of being shocking, because, he's done so many things that are unprecedented and that we never thought a president would ever try to do, that, as you say, we're shocked until tomorrow comes.
Right.
And then it starts all over again. So
and what strikes me, particularly is just like, I remember experiencing all these cycles of shock and outrage and fatigue, and renewed shock and outrage and fatigue. For 8 years of George W. Bush, I mean, it was the same thing back then. What kind of path did he take us down? We found out that our fellow citizens were okay with invading a country who had not attacked us on evidence that we were all pretty sure it was not, it was pretty questionable in the first place. But then when we found out that it was not real, nobody cared about that. We started torturing people. Mm-hmm. Torture. Really? Yeah. Torture. America? Yeah. We're supposed to be the good guys. That's not our brand, no. But nope, that's out the window. That's okay because our guy says it's okay. And, we had 8 years of that already. And those are the good old days.
Yeah, they're doing it to us. Therefore, you raise an issue, and it's something that I was going to talk about anyway. Have you seen, or are you familiar with the movie Vice?
Oh, I haven't seen it yet, but yes, I'm familiar with it.
I saw it Sunday. and I wanted to talk about it. It is
Sure.
incredibly powerful. And but when you raise it, when you talk about George W., I mean, there's a scene in that movie where at his ranch in Texas, where he's asked Dick Cheney to be his vice president, to be his running mate. And Cheney turns him down. And part of the reason he turns him down is because of Lynn. I mean, one of the things that comes through in this movie is the influence of Lynn Cheney over him. And the fact that literally she picked him. The movie begins, he's a pretty pathetic case. And she threatens to leave him and says, can you reform? Can you change? Can you stand up proudly, and can you stand for things that are important, and give us and our children the kind of life that we insist on? Because if you can't, I'm out of here. And she basically, when he mentions the vice presidency, she said, that's a meaningless position. It has no power. And so his argument is, well, I can't, and this is the one noble thing in that movie about Dick Cheney that I picked up on, was the fact that he pretty much gave up any hope of ever running for president, because in order to do that, he would have to turn against his daughter Mary, who had come out as being gay. And the issue disappeared from his political agenda, personal agenda. But he said, if I run for the presidency, I would have to take a strong position on that, which would violate the love that I have for my own daughter, and I won't do it. And to me, that was the one piece of redeeming quality that I saw in this. The irony of the situation is that when the other daughter was running for the Senate in Wyoming, and after George W. Bush left, she was running for the Senate in Wyoming, and the polls, she was running way behind. And they had a kind of a family meeting. And she said, Dad, I can't win this election unless I'm willing to take a strong stand against things like abortion and gay marriage and all the rest of it. And he looked over at his daughter Mary, and she said, if I don't do that, I'm going to lose the election. And Cheney kind of thought for a moment and said to her, go for it. And basically, she ran the campaign, came out, strongly opposed to to equal rights for gays. And she and her sister became estranged. At least the movie doesn't indicate that they speak yet. Now, whether they do or not, I don't know. But
I remember that in real time, though.
Yeah,
I'd forgotten about it, but yeah,
he did. Well, that's what the thing about the movie is. It brings back all of these little things that I had forgotten, and it ties them all together. And my God, the emergence of the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and oh my God, all of these things. And so basically, when Cheney makes the decision to meet with George W. about accepting his position as running mate for vice presidency, he goes to the ranch in Texas, and they're sitting out there, and he lays out an agenda for George W. And he said, basically, I can do it, but traditionally the vice presidency is a nothing position. But if you're willing, we can make it more than that. And he lays out, if you give me control over this, you give me control over the relations with the party, you give me control over the Homeland Security issues, you give me control over the Pentagon, you give me an office in the Pentagon, you give me an office in the CIA. And George W. thought for a minute and said, you got it. And he basically gave the keys to his administration to Dick Cheney. And that led directly to the Iraq situation and all the rest of it. My God.
Oh
And
gosh, if you
it,
if
it's
if you view the traditional, I don't remember who coined the phrase, but like the definition of tragedy
oh
is a spectacle of pity and horror.
oh it's
Isn't that
absolutely
it's an ongoing tragedy what we've been witnessing for
oh
since those days until now. And even when Barack Obama took over, and for a brief period of time it looked like we were going to get some respite from this, but then you could see at the same time when Sarah Palin was announced and the crowds
right
that were outside of the rallies, and they started
right
overt racism suddenly became a
oh yeah
thing in America after
yeah
I mean,
I
I
know
grew up. I was born in the early 70s. I mean, like the whole time I grew up, I'm not going to say there's no racism, but like, people had a sensibility to keep it under wraps,
oh yeah no
but
people
like, oh, whew, that
people
penny flew out the bottle,
people didn't openly avow this stuff. And that, I mean, it's not because of President Trump, but he has created an atmosphere which has made it okay for people to say things and do things that they never considered doing before.
And to me, this is like one of those key psychological question and political questions I have to ask myself. Is like, people say like, well, this is always there, and we could just let it out. But at the same time, I think there is a multiplier effect that happens when a leader like Trump gets in a position where he can make things worse than they ever would have been if he hadn't actually showed up. If you didn't get that particular catalyst at that particular moment in history, a lot of people that had like certain latent or potential, even violent, tendencies, all that stuff could have just stayed, down there and buried down somewhere in the depths of like individual psychology, where that you don't call on. I mean, same like a lot of other instincts, like I've never had to run in front of a bus to save a kid, but that stuff is down there. But I mean, like but with minus a factor like that pulls these things up from the recesses of your of the deep dark psychology of people. These things, these have a wave and a ripple effect on our entire culture. So it's really hard to, and I think that I hope that some good people are paying attention.
I do too.
To
One
the
of the
effects of how this is affecting our society and our culture, and measuring. Like when things go this way too far, you can start expecting things like this to happen. And what scares me is there's like a Karl Rove figure on the right who's like actually watching all the success that Trump has been having, and thinking, okay, well, if we remove this part and this part and this part, we can take this kind of energy and we can do whatever we want.
That's right. Exactly. And what you were saying before about people's willingness to kind of do this and to condone things that they never would have condoned before is incredible. And one of the things that I left this movie with was, if you think about it, is the gullibility of the people, what the American people are willing to put up with and are willing to believe. And once these guys realized what they could get away with, there was no stopping them. And that's when he literally went to Texas and sat down with George W. and basically made George W. a proposal that he couldn't refuse. I'll be your running mate, and you give me the power that you're the one that's supposed to have. And George Bush gave it to him.
To me, there's a straight through line between Ronald Reagan looking in the camera and saying, my heart tells me I didn't commit these crimes, but the facts say otherwise. That runs straight through Mitch McConnell, like withholding a Supreme Court, nomination for a full year.
Right.
These things that's on a spectrum. That's on a continuum. We're conditioning the American people to put up with one after another outrage. But here's what gets me: it only works for Republicans, and I'm still trying to get my head around how is that possible? If you put a Democrat in any one of those situations at the same point in history, they would get obliterated. They would they would be tarred and feathered, literally, in some cases literally.
Right.
what is it about the politics of aggrievement that the Republican Party has perfected the exploitation of it so perfectly that they continually are able to push us further and further towards the margins of just what we are down to, like what's even considered like basically acceptable human behavior.
Right.
We're taking children away from their parents. And we're putting them with foster homes. And now, and it's like life goes on. How does life go on? How do you do that? How do any of us do this? And I do that because I got my life. I have to keep. I got stuff to take care of every day. Meanwhile, all these outrages are shocking the conscious, but nobody's particularly conscious of it.
No,
I guess I don't know.
There's one thing that's going on right now that is a classic example of this, I think, and it's Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham spoke yesterday about the president's declaring a national emergency to get the wall. And he was talking to Republicans. He was in Greenville, South Carolina. And he basically said, this is not about the wall. This is about the man. If he doesn't get this wall, he's done. We're done. Because everything that we have ever hoped for is wrapped up in this guy's remaining president. And he's going to lose it all if he doesn't win this. So basically, what we've got to do is if he declares a national emergency, we got to support him because a lot of people are going to attack him for it. And I left and I saw that video. And I said, he is chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's the defender of the Constitution of the United States in the Senate, for God's sake. And look what he's endorsing.
He was a JAG officer, wasn't he? I mean, like, go all the way back to that man's history. It's like, you must. I've never been the hugest fan of Lindsey Graham by any means, but he's been astonishing this last year and a half.
Oh my God, he's totally turned. I mean, and he, as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he's the one in the Senate that's most responsible for making sure that the Constitution is not violated. And this claim of executive privilege on doctored up laws, dredging back through history and pulling out laws that will work so that he can get the military to build his damn wall and pay for it, it is a violation of the Constitution so dramatically that it's despicable. And he's whipping up Republicans to support it.
And he's doing it so blatantly and so just shameful.
Oh, it's just shameful. It's
shamelessly.
Race.
And you just, I'm not a person who likes conspiracy theories or something like that. But when you watch somebody display the kind of behavior that he's doing, you think to yourself automatically, this person is compromised.
Oh, totally.
And how and what and the details. Well, once you open that door, it's.
Well, that was my point. I really think that this is a classic example of what you were saying, that Republicans realize they can get away with anything, and they're doing it.
As long as they please their base, and as long as they get just enough support, and also gerrymandering doesn't hurt, and other things like being able to count on unlimited money in elections to sway the guaranteed percentage of voters who don't really pay attention to stuff and are conditioned by advertising more than by their own personal knowledge of events. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the only way to stop it, it seems to me, is if the American people are outraged by it. But unfortunately, there are too many people who might be outraged by it that really are afraid to take issue with it because they don't want to get into this fray because they're going to get butchered. Because these guys are ruthless. There's no rules. There's no point beyond which they won't go. They destroy people. And that's I think that's
one of the funny things that stuck with me from the back in the 90s when Clinton was running against Bush, and then later, well, anyway, when Ross Perot was a factor.
92,
and, yeah. Well, not both times, right? When
Yeah.
he came back for his second run in 96, I guess, he dropped out pretty early, and he said that the opposition they were getting in his campaign was so terrible. It was so personal. It was so scary that he had to drop out. He said, both parties have a way of getting to you and doing their opposition research and all that kind of stuff. But one of them, and he never specified, but he said one of them has elevated it to a sick art. That phrase has always stuck.
I remember that. I do remember that.
From that time to this. And that was the 90s.
Yeah.
We're through the looking glass since
then. We had George Bush, to deal with after that. Yeah. But, one of the things, and I'm going back to the movie again, but it's so applicable to what we're talking about. What I came away from that movie realizing was the fact that there's a close similarity between then and now, because what Cheney did was basically take away or negotiate away the president. The president was willing to give the powers of the presidency to the vice president, because George Bush, I don't believe George Bush had believed that he really could be president or ought to be president. I think maybe toward the end, when he realized that these guys were taking so much advantage of him, I think he tried to get a little bit of the executive authority back. But I really believe that he wasn't up to it, and these guys knew it, and they knew that they had a president that they could do whatever they wanted with and get away with it. And we got the same thing now. That's what McConnell's doing. McConnell is running these judicial appointments through at a record pace. Anything that and this was Paul Ryan, the things that Ryan wanted, like this tax cut for years, he never believed that he would ever have an opportunity to get them. And Trump has made it possible for them to get whatever they want, because he doesn't care.
Right.
His objectives aren't related to policy or the economy or anything else. They're all basically self-serving. And as long as you cater to his ego, he'll let you do anything. He'll sign anything.
Right. And that's exactly it. It's ego management. I remember, back when Bush was president, people would say, his final decision was generally, not every time, but quite often dictated by who got to him last. You just had to be the last person to to pitch an idea to him, and he would go with you. But with Trump, it's just he's 10 times more malleable than that. And
that's it. Yeah.
What bothers me is that, he's using unsecured telecommunication devices. He's using his own personal phone, and we know that the Chinese and the Iranians or whoever it is, anybody with a basically capable functioning intelligent apparatus is able to get it all. Listen into it, some of his personal communications. They probably have a lot better idea of his psychological profile than our own people do.
That's exactly right.
Our own intelligence services do, because he's estranged himself from them, and they're viewing him from the outside, much as foreign countries do.
Well, the irony of the situation is that not only are Republicans taking advantage of President Trump's ignorance, and that's really what it is. Of information and the facts of situations, but foreign governments, as you pointed out, as well. And it's obvious this whole idea of the Russian interference in the election is all in 2016 is all about the facts that they really believed that they could get away with it, and they're able to get away with things, and they know it now. So we have no idea what's coming down the pike. We really don't, because a lot of people are saying now that the only thing that we've remained lucky about so far is that there hasn't been an international crisis. And as the Mueller investigation thing crows in on him,
pressure's building on that, though.
Oh, it certainly is.
Oh, we got so many situations boiling up. I mean, look at me. I'm in Taiwan. I feel this very keenly. China has picked this year to step up the pressure on international
right.
What do you call that, recognition, and also the way that corporations and companies and airlines do is they've been ratcheting the pressure up pretty hot. Meanwhile, Xi has been giving speeches inside his own country, kind of preparing them for, and it's going to be an inevitable invasion because we tried so hard, but we can't talk sense into them, and so we're just going to go. I'm right here. I'm guessing 3 to 5 years. So looking something like that.
That's the difference between the Cheney period and now, because while Cheney was able to take advantage of the weaknesses of the president, the neocons that he represented had an agenda, had a world agenda.
Right.
And there were things they wanted to do, and the fact that they had this guy as president made it possible for them to do it. And now the same situation is true, but the problem is what the Republican Party wants to do is pretty much ideological stuff related to the economy and stuff. And it's open season for other nations to take advantage of this, because we're not out there in the world looking or being after anything or standing for anything.
It's the weirdest situation to be in when you look at. I almost take comfort in having John Bolton, in his position, because he's an old diehard Cold War warrior.
Oh yeah.
Anti-communist person, and if it were up to Trump, I think he would sell Taiwan out to China in a heartbeat for a really tall building in Beijing. And
right.
And that sounds facetious when I say that, but I think that's literally true.
No,
I think he would do that, and I think a person like Bolton, at least, is this is one of those things I've been wanting to kick around with you for a while. But what happens? The only thing that gives us some kind of temporary stability in foreign policy right now, with Trump in charge, is that other countries have to view us as an irrational actor. I mean, in terms of foreign policy, certain nations are going to protect their interests in this way and this way and this way, and they're fairly predictable. They're so-called rational actors. Then you have somebody like North Korea, who can just chuck the toys out of the pram, and you don't really know what's going to happen. America has kind of turned into that because everyone's looking at Trump, and we don't know what he's going to do from one day to the next. No. He could just and also the things he does things on a whim, according to his own egotistical needs, and everyone is scrambling like mad. China, Russia, the Republican Party, trying to find a way to keep him calm.
That's right.
And agreeable to their own particular agenda. And, you said McConnell's the same way, Paul Ryan's the same way. We can manage this guy. We're just going to manage this guy. And he's going to provide us what we want. And we'll just make him happy. And he'll stay nice in his corner and, play with his toys or something like that.
It's frightening. One of the things that and I found this interesting as well, because it speaks to the gullibility of the American people and the fact that these guys have realized they can get away with anything. But it's the issue of Iraq and the invasion of Iraq, and basically they did focus groups. They were doing focus groups on Al Qaeda, and what became very clear is that the people in the focus groups couldn't really understand the nature of a movement like Al Qaeda. It was something that they had never experienced before, or had never run across before. And the word that came back and it was very interesting because these leaders of these focus groups brought the word back to Cheney. And basically what they were saying is, these people want to do something in response to 9/11, but it has to be a country. The only thing that they can deal with is the fact that there needs to be an enemy country. We got to put it somewhere. And Cheney's conclusion is, if they want a country, we'll give them one. And so suddenly they undertook the research to pull together a case against Saddam in order to create an enemy that the American public could understand and feel good about, and the fact that we were getting even for 9/11, even though they didn't have anything to do with it. And the fact that they wrote this speech for Colin Powell, and I still can't understand why the hell he gave it. He said it was the most difficult thing he'd ever done in his life.
Well, and
it was the
you
biggest
remember hearing
mistake.
like the backstory chatter. Like he said it was BS when he heard what they wanted him to do, right? So
Yeah.
So he was definitely not on board originally, and was only, persuaded to do it under extreme duress, basically.
And they wanted him to do it because he wasn't viewed as one of this group of neocons. He was considered to be kind of a moderate in the middle champion of America, military career, and all the rest of it. They wanted him to give the speech. That was the only way it would work. And so they gave it to him, and they basically made the case that your party needs it, we need it. Our ability to influence government and influence foreign policy around the world is going to be contingent on being able to pull this off. And they did it. It included the outing of Valerie Flame. You remember that? Is it Flame? Was that her name? Or Plame?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Plame. Valerie Plame.
Yeah.
And
Plame.
Her husband, George, I think.
George Wilson. His name was Wilson.
George Wilson, yeah.
Yeah, and they did all of this. I mean, the movie connects all of these dots, and when you leave there, I was overwhelmed. It's an overwhelming feeling of hopelessness, because it was obvious that they said all we've got to do is this, and the American people go along with it, and they were exactly right. There's only one person that voted against Iraq, and that was a congresswoman from California. And I mean, it passed the Senate. Hillary was making speeches about Saddam and weapons of mass destruction. And all. Sure. They totally bought into it. And now Trump is referring to that all the time, in attacking his intelligence people, and said, look what they did. They screwed up. They messed up all the intelligence on Iraq. They were in part responsible for the Iraq war because they had bad intelligence and let George W. have his war and all this stuff, and they played to George W.'s desire to look good in the eyes of his father and all. I mean, Jesus, it was incredible.
It wasn't that wasn't Bush, and it wasn't necessarily the intelligence services, and this is something I just heard Trump bring up the other day. He says, like, well, you look at I guess it was his Super Bowl conversation, whatever. He says, like, he had intelligence services that told him to invade Iraq. They actually did not. That was Dick Cheney again. If you remember the term stovepipe, that came in because he wanted raw intelligence that he could filter for himself and find what he was looking for as a pretext for them to set policy, and he completely bypassed the entire intelligence operation. Intelligence told them. I mean, if you remember, like the guy Scott Ritter, he was a famous name at the time. That he was one of the UN weapons inspectors that said they absolutely do not have weapons in Iraq.
Right.
And they said, and then he said like that Saddam ejected the weapons inspection team from Iraq prior to the invasion. They did not. We ejected them because they were still there, and we were telling them to get out. And Ritter was on the team and says, like, no, they forced us out. Hussein didn't push us out. They did.
Right.
No,
they orchestrated the whole thing. I mean, they just orchestrated the whole thing. It was incredible, and they felt like they could get away with it, and they did. And they picked the people to sell it, the people that the American people would believe, like Colin Powell, and that's what we got now. Is we got a guy up there who can sell anything. He's willing to do anything. There are no boundaries to what he will or won't do.
This is what drives me crazy. He doesn't sell any of this. Everybody watches the words coming out of his mouth, and then we all know that they're completely false.
Right.
But we don't stop him. Nobody can stop him. Nobody could stop George Bush and Dick Cheney, and we were pretty sure back then. Dick Cheney, famously, at least to me, prevented himself being served a subpoena by threatening to have the court officer arrested if they tried to walk in the building.
Yeah.
What you tell me in the history of the entire republic, what Democratic president or vice president or even elected official could get away with that move?
Right. Oh,
and
my God.
That was not even a headline. That was a ripple, like out on the fringes of, like, you know, the kind of news sources that I used to read and you read and Bob read.
Yeah.
You know, like that didn't even make it. That didn't even make it to TV.
No. Oh, it's just incredible that, and once you get away with it, then there's no holds barred for the next thing that you need to pull off. And there's a wonderful article that was in the Washington Post a few days ago about the president's inclination to declare a national emergency for the over the wall.
Right.
And he said in the interview with CBS this weekend that he still leaving that on the table. He said, "I don't take anything off the table." In other words, I'll do anything. It's basically what he's saying. There's nothing I won't do. Is basically what he said. And the article in the Times pointed out the fact that if he does this, if he does declare a national emergency, then the way the law is written under which he would do it, Nancy Pelosi's Democratic control in the House, could hold a vote in opposition to his declaration of national emergency. And according to the way the law is written, if one house does that, the other one has to as well, which would mean that the Republicans would have to hold a vote on either supporting Trump's declaration of a national emergency or splitting with him.
Right.
And that if the president does this, he's going to force the Republicans to publicly have to basically vote on whether they support him or not. And that's really what McConnell went to the White House last week with and urged him not to do it. You're going to split the Republican Party within the Senate. You're going to do irreparable damage to our ability to hold the party together, to hold the Republicans together.
Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham has his own closed-door conference with his group, telling them you better follow him if he does this.
Yeah, because it's a matter of his presidency, and it's nothing to do with the wall anymore. It's him, and we've got to keep him in power because he's making it possible for everything we ever wanted to get done.
Now, McConnell's on the record, unofficially 2 or 3 times, having urged Trump not to take the position he did, but in public, come out full force in support of him and backed him up every step of the way. And so far, they have not paid the price.
No. Well, that's what I'm saying. Nobody's stopping this. Nobody is able to stop this. I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to be so involved in running for president in a couple of years, that in a year and a half, that they're not going to lead they won't stand up to him. All they want to do is run against him and get him out. By the way, I saw a piece this morning which was pretty important. You raised the issue about the rest of the world. According to this piece that was in the Post this morning, leaders of Europe are petrified that Trump will get reelected, because they said if he is there for 4 more years, he will decimate the European Union. There'll be no more European Union. The future of Europe is on the table for this election, and they're just holding their breath and staying back because they're really afraid that he's done so much damage. You're talking about pulling out of NATO and all the rest of it, and pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and all the rest of it, that he's basically going to I mean, nation after nation is seeing these nationalist insurgent movements, and that ultimately the European Union will fall.
Right. If those nationalist movements succeed or fail depends in a large part on what kind of assistance the local governments there get from us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they have agitators like Steve Bannon's been out there, stirring up those. That's a very big project for them, and why shouldn't it be?
It's this Brexit thing in England. I mean, if you watch what's going on with this Brexit, it's impossible. I mean, this is the stupidest craziest thing that anybody's ever seen. Theresa May totally blew this one. But anyway, so and the point is that if President Trump does do damage to the European Union, it's not anything he's setting out to do. It's just going to do it because his own priorities are going to drive what he does, and whether in fact this violates the best interests of the European Union, he doesn't care.
Oh, of course not. Europe is like it's another planet to him.
Just
except
amazing.
when he goes to the airports. Yeah, that's about it. Dr. Bill, I have pushed you way past your break time.
Well, fine. Well, I won't bother taking one now because.
Okay.
Are you kidding me? I loved it. Are you kidding me?
I just wanted to say I'm sorry.
Oh, I know. Hey, listen, I haven't had a discussion like this in a long time. This is great.
But, well, for me, it's been I feel like it's been almost 2 years. I'm not really sure, but
yeah,
I can't believe it's been so long. Yeah.
I was going to share with you. There's a little story that I saw that was, and this is tied up with this intelligence. The report it's in Time magazine. It's due to come out. What the intelligence community thinks about delivering intelligence to this White House and what accommodations they've had to make, or they feel that they have to make because of this president. And one of the things they used it as an example, which apparently it's going to be in the article, is they were talking about the strategic location of a couple of small islands in the Indian Ocean off the coast of India. And the names of them, I don't even know what they are. But they raised these issues with the president intelligence thing and and basically the point they were trying to make is these little islands are incredibly important strategically for what happens in this area of the world. And Trump's response was, do they have nice beaches? And are there development possibilities on these islands? And those were the only two questions he asked. And apparently whichever agency or was delivering this intelligence was absolutely, they couldn't respond. There was dead silence in the room. When he asked that question, he said, oh, given where they are in the middle of the ocean, little islands like that, they must have beautiful beaches. And there's probably all sorts of development potential in those little islands. And he's looking at it like from the perspective of a real estate developer. And the intelligence people are just dumbfounded. They're just saying he's on a totally different page than we are. My God, it's just amazing.
No, it's pretty astonishing.
Unbelievable.
We have a similar situation on here. China has been developing these little unmanned islands and turning them into like staging platforms for like what basically now is pretty obviously a way to repel any kind of naval attack from the West in defense of Taiwan. Again, all this stuff goes together. They've been
they're militarizing these little islands. And
they're turning into bases. They have a ton of those. They've got this Silk Road initiative that they're forming naval channels, from one country to another country across, transcontinental kind of a thing. They have apparently there are videos you can watch of fleets of unmanned underwater drones called gliders, I guess, that are just pretty spooky.
Yeah, it sure is. But in effect, what that means is they're blockading, potentially blockading Taiwan.
Well, no, they're preparing for a period of time when they can stage their own invasion and effectively fight off any kind of opposition from a friendly, neighborhood USA.
Right.
Just happen to be in the territory.
Well, I think officially the United States still considers the China Sea as international waters, don't they?
Well, occasionally we will sail carriers through the strait just to make a point, but it's pretty, generally speaking, when that happens, that's considered a bit aggressive. So,
yeah.
And I'm not really sure. And under Trump, we don't even have a functioning State Department.
No.
Like half of our cabinet appointments are acting people.
Yes.
We don't have. And really, what bothers me about this whole situation is, like, if you were someone who wanted to really buck American, the Pax Americana,
Right.
this would be your best chance you ever got in your life. It's never going to happen again.
No.
Because sooner or later, if we're given enough time to do it, we're going to come to our senses. But in the meantime, like what's going out on the outer peripheries of the empire, that stuff is crumbling, and people are hungry out there, and all kinds of. I mean, I have a lot of objections to the way we've conducted our foreign policy, and I don't like a lot of people that were in charge of it, or in charge of designing it, constructing it. But in the absence of that, who's going to step up and take that control? And if the American empire recedes, China is right there, and they don't have our values. They are on a completely different area, and I don't want to see them step up and fill that vacuum. It's not just my own personal interest, because that would be very terrible for me personally. But I mean, like, also, the world doesn't need that.
We had a program a couple of months ago with a guy named Kevin Shanley. Did you happen to hear that program?
I did. I got a chance to listen to it. It was pretty interesting as far as it went. I was disappointed he didn't mention Taiwan specifically.
No, he didn't. He didn't get it. Yeah. Well, he wants to come back, and I didn't want him to come back. I didn't want him to come back too quickly, but because I really wanted this to settle a little bit, but he wants to come back, and that was one of the things he mentioned, that he never got into that. He never got into the islands and the whole. But what he was able to do was sketch backgrounds and things, and how these things developed and where they came from. I just thought it was great.
Oh no, I mean, you had a number of diversions on foreign policy, like. I thought it was a fascinating conversation. And I hope. Why does he have to wait to come back? I mean,
well, no, I did that, I haven't. Well, with the holidays and everything, I didn't really want to do it. But now that we, and he kept saying, just let me know, and I will, because he writes on. He's involved with this Far East and Asia group in Manhattan. Right. He goes there regularly. He's on the board or something. And the president of this group that he's involved with is the former prime minister in Australia, and and they're really very active in in basically doing a lot more research on what's going on in China and the origins of the China threat, and what threat they really pose, and what's the difference between this particular Chinese regime and the one that's here now, and all the rest of it. And is this guy, even though this guy has authoritarian tendencies and all that, is he really the threat that a lot of people think he ought to be? And they're really addressing some really good questions, and Kevin is right. Kevin is right involved in it. I mean, he's right on top of it. I think it's a great resource. So
no, I listened to that podcast probably 2, maybe 3 times altogether. It's very, very good stuff there. It's very good material.
Well, I didn't know where he was going, so I couldn't really prepare.
Sure.
The only thing I told him is, I said, if you he said, just whenever you have a question or whatever, just raise it. And I said, well, I can't prepare because I really don't know most of what I know. I know from you,
Yeah,
so,
and nobody does. And like I've lived here for 17 years and a little extra, and he probably knows more about this area than I do. And I say probably. That's no question.
Well, he's learned it all. He's learned it all relatively recently, because I used to teach. I used to teach with him, and he wasn't into the Far East at all. His specialization was Europe, and
sure.
So I didn't even know that he had this interest. He retired, and he's in New York now. I think he lives in upstate New York, and Troy, New York, I think. And I knew that he retired from one of the state university of New York at Albany. And I knew that, and but I didn't know he was this heavily involved in Asia. And he's got a background. He keeps sending me copies of papers he's writing, and he's voluminous in what he's writing almost a paper every other week.
Gosh.
It seems like, and so it's really good stuff. And I read them all. I just
Wow.
but I don't really feel that I know enough to deal with it. The best way to deal with it is to get him on.
Right.
Let him deal with it, But
it's like a fascinating little window into it, like in a whole part of the world that you don't really get into.
God! Oh,
yeah,
it was unbelievable. And I had one other contact that we had during when I had the American history grants, and he's a professor, foreign policy guy at the University of Texas, and
this is the PRISM thing.
This was the PRISM thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And this guy wrote a book on nation building, and he talked about it as being in America's DNA. And I would love to find out from him how he feels about what Trump's doing, because Trump is undoing the whole nation building initiative of what existed under Clinton and all the rest of it, with the idea that that we would basically try to create a world that was in tune with our values and our priorities. And now
I remember that series of lectures. I heard that a couple of times. I don't remember his name either, but it struck me like it was in stark contrast, because one of George Bush's things when he was running for president, he staked out a position where he was so-called against nation building.
Right.
It's really strange when you go back and look at his candidacy, back in 1999, I guess. Like, he staked out a number of positions that he turned out to be just the opposite of.
Yes.
He was against nation building, and he brought up the idea of secret evidence in courts. Like, nobody was even talking about that. Like, no one, but then later on that became like a major factor of his anti-terrorism prosecutions. Like,
right.
Those are like little things that stuck in my head. But yeah. And so I remember, like, so the PRISM series, like, that was like, gosh, how long ago was it? That was like 2012. I don't remember.
It was 2009 to 2013.
Oh, you had a 4-year run. I didn't know that.
It was a 4-year run, yeah. And we started to do the live chats, more internet chats, more and more and more. Keith Lilly and I, we would bring these guys in, and I see a lot of them on TV now. This David Johnston, who won the Pulitzer Prize, has a think tank operation in Washington D.C. I just saw him the night before last on MSNBC, and he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. And God, we had him in the grant.
Oh gosh, I mean, like the reasons why I know, like, some of the best minds in history, like, John Kaminsky and
John,
yeah, and
I mean,
and Bob Cutler and all those guys. They came from just watching all those videos. But like, there's a series of videos that made it up to something that Bob posted online somewhere. I watched those, but I never saw Skype chats. I didn't know they even existed.
Right.
That's interesting. Wow.
Oh wow, it was unbelievable. But anyway. But I've thought a lot about renewing contact with this guy, because nation building under Trump is passé, and it's totally opposite to what the neocons. When the neocons under George Bush took a position against nation building, but when Trump and his guys got in there, they basically made it part of their agenda, and that's what they wanted to do. They were toppling governments. They wanted to topple governments all over the place. Sure. And that's John Bolton.
Right.
He's still he's the one that's left out of that group. And wow, it's kind of frightening. But anyway, I'm looking at my bookshelf here, and I got that book. His name was Jeremy Surrey, Suri.
Oh, right. Yeah, I do.
The book was called Liberty's Surest Guardian.
Yes.
And it's nation building. And the idea, the way to protect our values and protect us is to create a world around us that is us. And, And his argument is that's been the theme of foreign policy from the very beginning. It's a brilliant, and he's a young guy. I mean, he's going to be heard. He's going to be heard of for a long time. I really do believe. But anyway, it's amazing, some of these things. And as you say, you think you cover it all, and then tomorrow comes, and and something else comes up. And there's a lot of things scheduled this week with. One of the things that I was going to mention, you may be aware, over the weekend, the Washington Post published yesterday, I believe, about this subpoena. The Southern District of New York had issues a subpoena to the inauguration committee for Trump's inauguration, and they want all the documents related to who contributed, corporations that were involved, foreign contacts. Was there any foreign contributions to the president's inauguration? Because the fact of the matter is they raised $107 million, and they didn't spend on the inauguration even a quarter of that. So the question is, what happened to the rest of the money? Subpoenaed all of the records and all the documents associated with Trump's campaign, and who gave to it, and whether there were foreign contributors to it, and corporations involved in it, and they want every donor. And the fact of the matter is, and I didn't realize this, the guy that coordinated most of that campaign under Manafort was Rick Gates. And he's already pled guilty to money laundering and fraud and every other damn thing.
Every month it's like we find out that Robert Mueller had like a thread that like suddenly, like if you look at like all the people they're connected to, like, yeah, I at the one time I hope I'm as eager as anybody to see like all the corruption exposed, all the nefarious details and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm in such a hurry. I want this thing to be over with.
I do too, but I'm afraid I won't. I'm afraid I won't live through it all. I want to see the end. It's like watching the old serials in black and white on television years ago.
Right.
Cliffhangers
are killing me.
You got to be around. You got to be around for the end.
Yeah. And what do you mean I have to wait 4 months? I can't do this.
My God, I know. Yeah, this is the now generation. We want it. We want it now.
No, well, I don't know about that. I mean, it's not my own instant gratification instinct. It's like we've all been so put upon for so long. Like, we need some relief, Dr. Bill.
Yeah.
We've put up with enough. It's time for this to stop. That's really it.
God, I'll tell you. Listen, I'm telling you, you've made my day. Let me tell you, buddy. It's wonderful to hear from you. I'm so glad you got a job that you really like.
Well, I don't know if I like it yet. I'm going to find out next week.
Okay.
But I got a semester to test the waters and see what I think.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. No, I think you'll be fine. Because ultimately,
I don't know though.
Ultimately, it's not the job. It's what you do with it.
Well, yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah. In a lot of cases, you have a lot of influence on what you can bring to it. This particular environment for teaching can be pretty up and down, but I think it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
There's that. Well, listen, if I could leave you with one thing to kind of to kick around,
please do.
Until next time. One of the little things that's been bugging me, and this is one of those talking points or buzzwords that's up and around in politics these days, especially since someone wrote a book about it. The idea of tribalism, political tribalism. We're in our tribe, they're in their tribe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I want to suggest a different filter to view that through, which is simply. Tribalism is also a phenomenon in developmental psychology. You go through like certain levels of development where you can see things from a certain perspective, and then like you get a little older and you can see things from a different perspective, and up and up and up it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like you give like a 5-year-old you could show them a glass that's tapered from top to bottom, and fill it like halfway full, and give the same glass to a 3-year-old. But anyway, whatever. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to get pulled into the details. You know what I'm talking about. You're an educator. You've been through all this before.
Well,
so, but anyway, what people are decrying is tribalism, like we're in our tribe, and like the Democrats are in their tribe, right, and Republicans are in their tribe, and we can't see eye to eye because we just feel like we're in our own little group identity.
Right.
The one thing that really bothers me about that is that we're not talking about a mindset. We're talking about a developmental stage. And one of the things we were talking about, like, Trump's base are so invested in inflicting pain on their perceived enemies,
Mm-hmm.
There's not a two sides about that. There's not a both sides, argument to Democrats don't want Republicans to suffer, we want them, or what I'm going to call Democrats, we want to move forward. We want to go to the next stage. We don't want to hurt other people. We don't want to drink their tears, or whatever the phrase is. It's like, that's not what we're into. That's not what we're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
The people that want to do that are operating from a tribal view. It's like, we are in our little group, and we have to protect ourselves against the world, because the world is hostile and it's dangerous and it's weird.
Right.
The people out there, they're not people like you and me are. They're different. They're like a different species.
I hear you.
Right. The tension is between tribalism and globalism. And, globalism, if we have to like pick a word, to define that mindset, is that people are people, and that all the things that we think and feel and believe are determined by environmental factors, and not something in the DNA, like race, for example, or whatever. So, I just want to mention this because it just drives me crazy.
Right. I know where you're coming from.
Where people are like having this debate, like, oh, it's just Washington tribes, doing this and that. It's the left and it's the right. No, it's the right. The left is global. Mm-hmm. By and large, of course, you're going to find exceptions to everything, but by and large, the left is more of a globalist mentality, where people are people, and we're all, living a relatively common experience, from different perspectives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I know. I understand. And the point is, you can look at this from, if you look at the map of the country and looking where the Democratic strengths are, they're on both coasts.
Right.
And the Republican strengths are in the middle of the country. And that you begin to see that there's a geographical component to this. As you point out, there's a psychological component to it. Mm-hmm. Clearly, there's a political component to it.
Sure.
So you're right. I really believe, but I've mentioned, you can't help but mention it, because tribalism is coming up so often.
Right.
And basically, when you pointed out that it's a stage of development.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, because it seems to me what you're saying is, from the Republican side, they're not ready to move to the next stage yet. They like this one.
Well, in developmental psychology, one of the key components is you progress from one stage to the next with an increased capacity for empathy, basically, for being able to imagine or experience, perspectives not your own. And, and we've talked about this in the past, Dr. Bill. You remember, like, when the ACA, Obamacare, like, some of the first early successes came in, and you would hear accounts of people. It's like, I never thought it would happen to me.
Yeah.
But it was me. And like, suddenly, oh, now I get it, because now I can take on that perspective. That perspective was closed to me. We're actually talking about psychological development there, when you're able to take on, the perspectives of people who are dissimilar to yourself. And it's not a coincidence that, you get blue up and down the coast, where the major population centers are, where there's the most multicultural, because there's a much greater level of mingling of perspectives, from
Right.
people of different cultures, where of course it's deep red in the middle, and the more sparsely and urban, not suburban and rural, communities, because those populations tend to be more homogenous.
Right.
Yeah, of course. These things, they all bleed together. The psychological, developmental, all that stuff, educational also, because your educational priorities change. If you do your own particular, culture as supreme, and that requires preservation, against the world, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know. It's a large topic to get into, but I mean, like,
yeah, but it's worth getting into. You're right. It's important. Horst, I got to tell you, man, you really made my day, and I hope that the people who end up listening to this will appreciate the things that you bring to it. It's great to hear from you, and I'm so happy for you. I miss hearing from you. I love today.
I wish I could make it happen more often, Dr. Bill.
I know.
It's hard to schedule it during program times.
I know that.
But this is Chinese New Year week, so I've got a week of vacation right now.
Oh,
so,
great.
So I was able to pull it off this time.
Well, listen, thank you so very much. We're just about ready to sign off. I think we got like 2 minutes to go.
No, I think you're about right. Yeah. Very good to catch with.
Thank you, bud. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great hearing from you. Stay tuned, okay? Thank you.
Going.
I will. I'll try. Okay, thanks, buddy. Wow. That is so intense and so, to me, so exciting and so reinforcing that it's hard to really put it into words what that meant, and the ability to connect dots. And it seems that it's the way that all of us learn. And I think it's a classic example of what I think the whole mission, the whole idea.
Hello, Bill. Are you still with me? Well, we seem to be having a technical problem, and I'll get Bill back, and we'll be right with you.
It's not a surprise that President Trump is a Patriot supporter and counts among his closest supporters and friends Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, and Tom Brady. So that many people see the same kinds of tendencies and the same kinds of things in the New England Patriots that they see in President Trump and his administration. That's just one example, one thing that I think is obvious, and there are a number of more, but we'll get to them tomorrow. We are pretty much out of time. My clock shows 59 minutes after the hour. So what I'd like to do is take this opportunity first to thank Horst, but more important, thank those of you who continue to listen and support this program, and who continue to support the network itself, the Head On Radio Network, and the work of Bob and Agnes and those folks. So thank you so very, very much. You'll never know how much all of us appreciate you, those people out there who regularly support the program and continue to keep us going. So thank you so very, very much. Have a wonderful rest of this Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you so very, very much.